In this video guide, I'll show you how to stitch the Cornflowers kit from the Botanicals range. So first up, what's in the kit? So you've got a little card here that tells you a little bit about Cornflowers, and then we've got our stitching instruction booklet, and this has guides on lots of different stitches, more than what you use in the Cornflowers kit. This has everything from across our full Botanicals range. Then you've got your very important stitch plan, and this shows you what stitch to do where, having numbered, coloured sections that match up to the bobbins. So you see you have sections titled as stem stitch, and then they link to the guide in here, so you can see in here you have the instruction on those particular stitches. You've got a hoop and a guide on how to use the hoop. Then you've got some bobbins of thread, and these numbers match up to the colours you have on the plan. So you see number 3 is the number 3 blue from the plan. And then you've got your fabric, and that's printed with the design along with a couple of needles of different sizes. If you're stitching this for clothing, then instead of the fabric, you'll have this section including printed pieces of transfer paper with each of the design. These are what you'll use to stitch on clothing, and there's a separate video showing you how to use those specifically. So first up, I'm going to get my fabric and I'm going to pick the area to start stitching. We've given you a large and a small needle, just depending on what your preference is. I like working with a small needle, but for some people, if you want an easier job threading the needle, then use the large. Right, so I'm going to put my hoop onto the fabric. So I place my inner hoop on the back, outer hoop over the top where I want to stitch, and I press down, getting the fabric taut. I'm then going to start stitching the stem stitch sections. So that's all the leaves and the stems of the flower. So I'm putting my hoop here into a hoop stand, and that's just for ease of the video. You do not need a hoop stand for stitching your designs. On the back of the instruction booklet, we do have pictures in high resolution of the flowers, so you can refer to these to see how to do the stitches. But we're going to start with our stem stitch. So I'm grabbing my dark green thread, and just remember you can refer in here to how to do the stitches, but to begin with, throughout all these flowers in the entire range, we use 3 strands of thread to stitch them. So I'm starting by cutting myself an arm's length of thread, and then I'm going to go on to separate out the strands. So you see, all I'm doing here is pulling away 3 strands of thread. Now it's good practice with the 3 strands you have left over. Do wind them back onto the bobbin because you'll come on to use those for your next bit of sewing. Right, I'm threading up my needle now, and I'm just going to tie a knot in the end of the thread, and use whatever method to tie a knot that suits you. And I'm going to begin my stem stitch. Now stem stitch is a lovely simple stitch to do. So I'll show you it close up here so you can get a feel for exactly what I'm doing. So with the stem stitch, I create a stitch going forward, and then halfway along it, I bring my needle back up. Now not splitting the thread, but bringing it halfway along, always on the same side. As you keep going like this, it starts to create the appearance that the thread is wrapping around itself. It's a really simple way of doing stitching, and it works beautifully for flowers. If you're not entirely clear on how to do it, then there is a separate video showing you stem stitch specifically. So if you need a bit more detail, do go find that video in the how-to guide section of the website. But here I'm just going to keep going, filling in all the leaves and stems. So I'll show you that for a section before we move on to the flower heads. So you can see I'm keeping going here, just filling in all the leaves as we go. And I'll apply exactly the same method to the stem of the flower. Now on the reverse, I'm just going to secure my thread. So I come underneath the stitches here. And there you can go. You can see exactly how these are done. Now let's go on and I'm going to show you how to do the flowers themselves. So here for the flowers, we're going to be doing a basket weave. And I'm using these different shades of blue. There's a separate video on basket weave, but I will show you what I'm doing here. But to begin with, I'm doing exactly what I did before. I'm cutting an arm's length of thread, splitting down to 3 strands, threading up the needle and tying a knot. And that's what I need to get going. So for my basket weave, I start at the end of each petal and I work inwards. So I bring my needle up and I follow that diagonal line of the V shape at the top of the petal. And then I go up to the other side and come across. So I create an X. And then I just move down the petal, creating these same X shapes. So always going from one side to the other and then back again, working down. And as you do that, you start to see that the strands weave together, creating what we call the basket weave. It's a really satisfying stitch and a lovely way of covering quite a good area. So I'll show you that across quite a few petals here. And just give you a feel. Now I'm just doing this in this mid blue, but you'll repeat the exact same process on the other petals using the darker blue. So just imagine that you've also completed in the darker blue. What I'm then going to go on and show you is how to do the central part of the flower. So the central bit is just in this brighter, more vibrant blue, and I'm doing that in a satin stitch. So that's with my dark blue goes onto the other petals and then my satin stitch for the bright blue. So again, cut yourself a length, thread up your needle, tie a knot, split down to 3 strands, and then wind your remaining threads back onto the bobbin. So let's go in, let's tie the knot and let's get in there and show you how to do the satin stitch. Again, this is included in the plan showing you that you're using a satin stitch here. So I bring my needle up and I go across and I work in this looping manner where I always bring my needle up on the same side. So it creates volume because you have the same amount of threads on the back as you do on the front. And I use my satin stitch also for the tops of the seed pods. So just these little bits, I'm also using my satin stitch there. Super. So now we're going to do the seed pod itself, and this is a little more complicated. This is our darning stitch. And again, there is a separate video which will show you how to do the darning stitch. So I bring my needle up and across and I create stitches from side to side, but with quite a gap between them. So not like my satin stitch in that I'm leaving a gap. And then I just tie off that thread and I'll thread up with a second colour, and this is when we start the darning process where we weave our thread in and out. So I'm putting my hoop back onto the stand and I'm going to get my second colour of blue. And I bring my needle up at the bottom, and here you see I'm in the middle, and all I'm doing is I'm weaving in between those strands that I laid down before, and that's why you need to leave a gap. You have to have a gap or else it'll be impossible to weave between. So then I bring my needle back up at the top and I just weave the opposite way. So strands I went over before, I'll go under the second time. And I keep going, filling in the shape, weaving underneath. You may notice I'm using the reverse side of my needle to do the weaving, just because I find this easier, as using the sharp side can split the strands. And it just creates this lovely little woven seed pod. So the final bit of the design which we need to show you is how to stitch the words, and this is all done in a back stitch. So I'm getting my hoop on the right position here. I've got my needle threaded up, again with 3 strands, and all I'm doing is a back stitch. So the way a back stitch works is you always move forward a stitch and then you stitch back into the last hole. And the idea is this creates a long chain of stitching with no gaps. So you can see I'm going to keep going, stitching the words, and I'll just show you a small section of this, but it's a really lovely stitch, and if you're unsure, just go back and watch that first bit a few times. So you're going to keep going till you've got all those words done. And that's the last bit of the design. I really hope you enjoy stitching this. It's small and delicate and will teach you loads of new skills.